Breaking news today. The NATO summit must have been very unsettling for Moscow. Another example of Putin's massive strategic error is his invasion of Ukraine, which has ensured that the country will eventually join NATO. Ivo Daalder is the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the host of the weekly podcast, World Review with Ivo Daalder. He previously served as the U.S. ambassador to NATO. While NATO leaders were meeting in Vilnius last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky posted an angry tweet that overshadowed the summit. In a tweet, Zelensky called it unprecedented and absurd that no timelines had been established for either an invitation or Ukraine's membership. He tacked on, "Uncertainty is weakness, just to be sure." During the two-day meeting in Lithuania, the tweet caused an uproar and was the primary topic of conversation. It's too bad about that. A larger and more lasting story has been lost in the upheaval caused by the tweet and Ukraine's dismay. Vladimir Putin's decision to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine has turned out to be a colossal strategic mistake, and the NATO meeting can hardly have been comforting from the Kremlin's point of view. Let's begin with what's bothering Zelensky the most. Kyiv was never going to receive an invitation to join NATO. Even the Ukrainian president admitted that joining an alliance whose primary goal is to defend all of its members' territory during a time of war would be impossible. NATO nations have repeatedly stated that they will aid Ukraine in defending itself, but that they will not become active participants in the conflict. NATO leaders in Vilnius did not extend an invitation to Ukraine, but they made it clear that Ukraine's future is in NATO. Vice President Joe Biden of the United States said that Ukraine's entry was not a matter of if, but when. Ukrainian membership in NATO, which would otherwise be delayed until the end of the war, was also expedited after NATO agreed to waive the usual requirement that Kyiv first join its membership action plan. From Moscow's vantage point, none of this looks promising. One of the reasons for the invasion, Putin said on Russian television, was that Ukraine might join NATO. In fact, he went so far as to claim that it won't increase Ukraine's security, as if his bloody invasion hadn't already done that. Putin's decision to attack has all but ensured Ukraine will join NATO, if not immediately then soon after the conflict ends. Biden has predicted that Ukraine will join NATO. The prospect of Ukraine joining NATO was probably not the only thing that gave the Kremlin pause. At the Vilnius summit, NATO countries also pledged substantial new military aid to Ukraine. To join Britain in promising to deliver long-range missiles, France has made similar promises, which will likely prompt the United States to follow suit and send its own long-range ATACMS to Ukraine. Germany has said it will send 25 more tanks. Ukraine's F-16 training will be coordinated by the Netherlands and Denmark. And Washington promised to send hundreds of thousands of cluster munition rounds to fill the void in Ukraine's artillery supply. Kyiv's chances of mounting a successful counter-offensive against Russian forces will improve as a result of all this. Moreover, the G7 leaders gathered in Vilnius to disabuse Putin of any hope that Western resolve to help Ukraine militarily would wane. The 7 largest industrial democracies issued a declaration assuring Ukraine of their commitment to long-term support for the country's defense capabilities, even after hostilities have ceased. The Kremlin received a resounding message: "We will always stand with Ukraine." There were other topics discussed at the NATO meeting besides Ukraine, but none of them boded well for Moscow. Finland, as the 31st member of the alliance, attended the meeting in Vilnius. With its addition, NATO's border with Russia doubled in size. Putin's invasion, which was meant to keep NATO far from its borders, has instead brought the alliance much closer together, which is a consequence in and of itself. On the eve of the summit, Turkey decided to drop its objections, making Sweden the 32nd member of the alliance. This will effectively trap the Russian Baltic Fleet in its home ports, turning the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake. And the Arctic will become a NATO stronghold, with all but Russia among the alliance's 8 Arctic members. Finally, what will ultimately be Russia's biggest headache, a collective commitment to significantly strengthen NATO's planning and capacity to defend every inch of alliance territory, including its eastern flank, received the least public attention. Canada has announced that it will double its presence in Latvia, and Germany has announced that it will send 4,000 troops to Lithuania. As for the future, NATO has promised that it will be able to deploy 300,000 troops in just 30 days.